even the actual assessor has since come out and said that they think we got it wrong. And why? Because the information that they got was wrong. So, yeah. I think that's the context to what Sally was talking about. And I'm not going to go through those stats because you all went, because yeah, it's pretty depressing. And I think it's something that's probably why you're all here today, is that, you know, in some way, shape or form, you have an opinion about what's going on. And so, yeah, it's something I was looking at and thinking of using design as a tool. And there's a show at the Design Museum, and that sort of body of research is what I'm going to talk about today. But I'm also going to set it into context. But just to give you a little bit of a flavour as to the sort of where the work started, was I was really heavily looking at case studies. So I did this sort of scoured the world for projects that were dealing with waste in really innovative ways. And just to show you some of these, this is the Billion Oyster Project in New York City, which is a goal of engaging 1 million people to restore 1 billion oysters around New York and at the harbour. And it's about biodiversity, this is about protecting the city's shoreline, so it's also sort of a defence strategy. As part of the project, they've got 60 restaurants working with them, so it's a sort of recycling program and an education program for local youths. And China is actually an incredible sort of case study. I mean, they can just plow projects through. This is Tianjin, and all of these areas would have been deeply polluted, and now wetlands and walking paths. And I would encourage you, for those wetland lovers, to look at Chinese projects, because they're amazing. But even looking at things like this, which you might not like that or not, or aesthetically be your cup of tea, but this is a project done by the New York Port Authority, and it's a sort of modular seating system, and what you can't see underneath that is that there are these huge tanks, and so it's purportedly to hold water in events of flooding, but actually it's meant to also raise awareness around the issue. And so it's a very public display of something being useful, but also educating people. And so I've got loads of these, and if someone wants to chat to me for about 2 hours about it, please do come. But I thought I'd leave it at 3. Oh, sorry, one more, because actually design isn't just things and systems, it's also how we manage. And this is, I thought was a really interesting example of a city in Spain that re-municipalized its water, and in doing so it actually engaged with activists, and is aiming to do a lot of participatory budgeting and really thinking of water as a common good. And in order to do that, it's gone, we actually need to municipalize this. And I think in the UK we are, whether by decision or by default, because it sounds like a lot of these water companies are actually just going to go bust, we're going to be very much in this territory anyway. And so out of looking at this sort of survey of ideas, I distilled them to about 4, and I'm going to run you through them. But before I tell you this story, I have to tell you this story. And to do that, I've got to go back in time to 2011, when I started my PhD, and I went back to India. I grew up in India, so it sort of made sense. And this is a place called Savdagevra. It was on the edge of Delhi. And as you can see, people lived here, they built their own homes, and it's called Site and Services, but it was actually sites and no services. So you had to collect your own water. Electricity was, I think, it was really the only service that was provided, and there was no sanitation. And my PhD, with my architecture hat, I was a sort of recent architecture graduate, and I was like, I'm going to do housing, and I'd done the whole sort of bit around cooperative housing, which was my thing at the time. And I was doing surveys of how people lived and understanding what was an accelerator and barrier to housing investment in this community. And this diagram I produced very quickly, because I realized that most people, 95% of people lived in single-story homes, very small plots. But actually of that 95, 50% were in houses that couldn't grow up. And when going up is the name of the game, because the more you build, you can then rent it out, you can lease, you can get a rental, you can make a shop. And so I realized, wow, even though these people had sort of partial tenure, the housing economy was really stunted. And when I was interviewing people, I realized that what was driving this growth was actually a toilet. And this is sort of the same house, years apart. So when I first met this family in 2010, they would wash and clean their kitchen utilities in front of their home and go to the toilet in a field. And the following year, when I returned, they'd managed to secure a loan, and I had built this home. And see the toilet there on that second floor. And in this case, it being because there was a bride entering into the home, but often what these triggers were young women entering into the home, or a bride. And many years later, I've been many times to SAFTA. I spent a lot of my life there. In 2016, this house beautifully tiled their exterior and added another toilet. And it was this kind of realization that completely changed my PhD, and actually was when I discovered my love for sewage. And I guess it's because I also feel that I would never want to go into something like this. This was what the state had actually provided for the residents of SAFTA Gevra, and I think the image speaks for itself. And I, at the time, knew nothing about waste and how it's managed. And so I was walking around and saw this rag on this thing and said to the homeowner, I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Well, that's my tank where I collect my waste. But it's too expensive for me to manage that, so I have this rag which effectively would kind of screed the effluent, which would then go out onto these drains that you can see just there in the corner. And these drains are meant to move water, but end up moving waste with really high pathogen content. And that's a huge problem around these kind of environments, is that all it takes is a fly to land on your mouth, and then you will be very sick. And so it was in this context that I started working with this community to deliver a piece of sanitation infrastructure and to upskill myself around how we treat wastewater and and in the context of a very poor and marginalized community on the edge of Delhi, what's possible. And so there you can see me drawing a baffled reactor tank and talking to people, and this was a really crude models of how we'd work with existing residents. So people who'd made that investment, how we weren't disregarding that and saying, right, we're going to disconnect you and connect you into a shared infrastructure. But the thing I'm most proud of was actually, as part of this project and to deliver it, was a huge amount of community engagement to take that community on board with us and to hear their feedback. Because they had things to say about it. And, for example, like, no, we need grey water to go into the system, which was something when early designs, I thought, I'm not keen on soap, basically. But they were like, no, for the system to work, you have to be able to have soap coming into it, because that's how we live our lives. And so we set up an all-woman operation and maintenance team. At the time, I think I'm more of a radical feminist now. I think I did that without meaning to, but there was definitely feminist undertones around acknowledging the role that women play in the world. And for me, why I'm most proud of this is that this is an example. These women were trained. They ended up actually being the kind of, they hired the contractor because they were trained in the operation and maintenance of that system that was being designed. And so here you can see that designing and building sanitation infrastructure can be part of a process of empowering women and that experience of defecating in the open, which is so disempowering and fundamentally dangerous, not just to your health, but to your physical body too, can be an exercise in capacity building, dignity building. And I can't take credit for this. This was part of a big team. We were working on the ground. I worked with a fantastic organization called CURE, Center for Urban and Regional Excellence. But in many ways, the actual pipe work was quite easy. This was the difficult stuff. But this was also what made it successful.